Pop Culture Pastor.
Okay, Cody, it's time for another watch along. Expedition Unknown, episode 4.5.
4.5.
Yeah, the weird special episode in the middle for Shark Week throws you off a little bit, but we've labeled it as a bonus. For what it's worth, this was the big question last week. What would this week's be labeled? And it's labeled episode 4 on Max.
And if Max says it, then it has to be true.
Yeah, that checks out. That checks out. It's truth.
There's so many thoughts that I have whenever we talk about Max, but I will save that for a different pod.
Yeah, let's just get to it. This is what I found this episode to be a little different than the normal episode. It seems like there were less stops on this episode. Usually there seems to be 3 or 4 different stops that Josh is going, different people he's meeting. But this episode consists mainly of 2 stops.
2, that's all you really need in life.
And really, that's the bulk of the episode. So let's just get right to it because, Cody, the past is all around us. It's a world of mystery, danger, and adventure. And every week we travel the roughly 0.8 mile from our houses to the recording studio to podcast about Josh's travels to the far corners of the earth to find where legends end and rivets begin.
Exactly.
All the rivets. I was not prepared for the amount of talk about rivets we were going to get. And just off the top, because we don't have to go through this whole episode before I can ask you this. Did you like this episode? Was this fun?
It wasn't super fascinating until the very end. Like when they find debris field, essentially, in the Aurora Borealis capital of the world.
Yeah, it's weird. I usually can identify with the jobs these guys have. The people that Josh is hooking up with, I usually can identify with and say, "Oh, I'd like to be that guy. I'd like to be the guy that just goes out looking for, the James gang's treasures or the Dalton gang or Revolutionary War stuff." You know what I'm saying? Like, I dig the idea of going out with a metal detector. However, the idea of piecing together an old plane that no longer exists and the manual no longer exists, that was all very overwhelming to my consciousness. I just found myself being like, oh, this seems awful. Awful. Who are these people? But they had a whole team of them there, and that's what they were going to go for and what they were doing. So
as we were watching this, I had the ship of Theseus. Yeah. Come into my brain. Is it actually this plane if we just Mod Podge this all together?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting concept, right? At several points, I'm like, okay, but what's the point of this? This isn't trying to find the tomb of Alexander, for instance. This isn't trying to find some important archaeological artifact place. This is like trying to find something we manufactured. It's kind of weird to think about because once you get into it, you find out some details of the story. We're not talking about something that got lost or even that they all ended tragically in war. We're talking about something bureaucrats buried at one point.
Buried, scrapped it.
Because they didn't know how to, scrap the project, right? And then they buried it, to not be embarrassed about all the money they spent, I guess. But it was war, like literally helped you win the war. What are we embarrassed about? That whole part, that was one of the more interesting parts. I'm like, oh, let's get into that. Why would you have people bury it and arrest the dude that happened to accidentally witness it?
I got thoughts.
So it's just an interesting thing that Josh is going out looking for in this episode. The episode starts off, as always, with the history lesson, right? So Josh is in his lair in New York City 1 week earlier after it shows us the exciting clips from the episode that we're about to see. And he starts talking about the Blitz, when the Germans were bombing England, pelting them. And England, so my grandma was from England. She has stories from that time, stories I grew up hearing, and it's rough. It's a rough thing. And so the Luftwaffe is dominating England, and England comes up with this aircraft that they call Barracudas, which, interesting name for an aircraft, given that it's sea life and or a muscle car, American muscle car from the 70s.
Or a song by heart.
Yes, or, ooh, Barracuda. How many times did you sing that in your head during this episode?
I had it going about at least 5 times.
Yeah, but it appears, so what it is the first all-metal aircraft that the British make. Essentially, they needed it to have enough power and to have enough heftiness to be able to lug these very heavy bombs that they could go on these bombing runs. And it ends with, a victory, basically, that these planes take out a German battleship that was, pretty legendary. So that's what they're looking for. This whole episode is about finding these Barracudas, 2,600 manufactured. None of them survive today.
The question is, do we care?
Well, those dudes certainly care, but I think that's a fair question. Like I said, this is a weird episode. I'm kind of sitting there. I'm not as into it as I am other episodes, but Josh, as always, is very engaging, very charismatic. I actually like kind of some of the side characters we meet, and we'll talk about them here coming up.
So have you ever been to airplane museum?
I have. There was one in Topeka. The Forbes Field has an air museum, and it's probably small compared to the one we see in this one. But I've also been to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which is really cool. Everyone should go there if you have a chance. There's amazing aircraft in there. And I don't know. I'm not one of these people who's like really, boys growing up, you're either really into flying and being in the air or you're not.
I really am about that flying life.
He's about that life. Astronaut Cody, that's what we call him.
I actually have flown a plane.
Like in the air, or you took off and landed?
In the air.
Okay. You couldn't land us, though.
I couldn't land us, but I navigated us from Bartlesville, Oklahoma to this lovely community that we call Chinook, Kansas.
I mean, that's literally an hour and a half car ride. Okay, a little bit more, maybe 2 hours.
I'm just saying I did it because someone had to get their flight instructor license, and so they had to instruct me on how to fly.
Oh, wow.
So that's a true story. I've been to museums that were air and space based, and some of them are very intriguing, but then, you can only look at so many planes.
Yeah.
Especially if you can't go up, touch them, or walk into them and look around. After a while, it's okay. That's a plane. That's an old plane. That's another old plane. You could literally put a model out, and I'm not going to be able to tell you if it was the real McCoy or not. Sure, there would be historians that are like, oh, that is not the right type of metal. How dare you?
Yeah, it's weird because so we see these people in this episode. They're literally this is this team in this museum who are attempting to rebuild one of these Barracudas part by part. And literally in a lot of the episode, we're talking about rivets.
Yes.
The individual rivets. I can't imagine, and I'm a little overwhelmed. My ADHD brain becomes a little overwhelmed by the thought of it. The thought of painstakingly going through these little tiny pieces, cataloging them, trying to figure it out. Because as they said, nothing survives about how these were put together. So they have to reverse engineer it from the parts.
Oh, that's just silly.
And that just is, my brain shuts down. I get overwhelmed and my brain says, nope, can't think about that. So having people like that in this episode to the people that we are, where I'm just I grew up in Topeka, where they had an air show at this Forbes Field. It's a, Air Force kind of airstrip area. And in fact, they're refueling a very big refueling unit stations there that goes, overseas, refuels our fighters. And in midair, by the way, which is the whole point. It's really cool. But they used to have these air shows back in the day when I was a kid. And they would go on all day on like a Saturday. Just constantly things in the air. And most of the day it'd be like old planes, biplanes, just these two. And like you said, after a while, it just gets repetitive. You're just like, yep, there's another plane. Until every year they would have the main show would be like the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds or someone like that. And that was different and cool and would get your attention. But I'm kind of like you. I'm just like, okay, that's a plane. That's a plane. That's a plane. After a while, it just becomes, they're all the same. Now, if you've ever seen a stealth bomber, that's different.
That is.
Because those are huge, first of all. And then they seem to be going through the air without a lot of noise because the sound takes so much longer to reach you because they're moving really fast. So those are kind of cool. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't have this fascination for aircraft. But the dudes that Josh meets at the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Somerset, England, they do have this fascination. And they're this team that's trying to rebuild these planes part by part. He meets curator David Morris, who seems like a stand-up guy.
Big Dave.
Big Dave, as we call him. The biggest collection of historic naval aircraft in Europe. That's what that museum has.
Name it and claim it.
He does. He names it and claims it. Tens of thousands of individual components is what they're cataloging and librarying and attempting to use to try and reconstruct it. They show a wide shot of him like walking through, and it's literally a pile of junk.
Yep.
They got planes, old planes, and then a pile of junk. And he's like, here it is. And again, my brain shuts off. Nope.
They might as well just be putting this together with Legos.
Funny story about my brain is I would never clean my room because it would get into such a big mess. My brain would just shut down. Like it's overwhelming. And my mom would eventually come in and clean my room.
Well, that was nice.
Yeah. But like I didn't know why I couldn't start things that seemed overwhelming to me. And now I do because I know how my brain works. And yeah, so I felt that over and over again this episode. But he is meeting these guys. They're talking about how, they have to put them together, that this is literally my nightmare. It's like get the largest Lego set imaginable, but do it without the instructions.
I'm out.
Yeah. And they take parts to the blaster, which seems to be the most powerful power sprayer ever, I guess.
Yeah.
And yet he's wearing gloves and it's spraying it's not just water. There's some kind of
sand particle
chemical mixed to it as well. And, you got to be careful. And I just thought, wonder how many people have lost a finger in that thing.
My guess, at least 2.
I did think about, what could you put in there? What could we spray with that and make it look cool?
I don't know.
Is there literally anything I own that I could put in there and not destroy? I mean, I don't think there is. I think it'd just destroy anything I put in there and try to spray.
You need to find something very antique.
I'm nominating Cody's face. Hey, Cody, just get in there. Just a quick wash. Just a quick rinse.
So long beard.
Basically, this whole part of the episode is just them kind of describing the conundrum. This idea that there weren't very many of these made. None of them exist out in the real world anymore. And they have no idea how to put them together. So they're just looking for parts. It seems like, well, won't you always be looking for parts if you really have no idea how to put them together? How will you know when you have all the parts?
I imagine that although they don't know what all the parts are, I imagine some of them are just generic mass-produced parts that were standard for all planes. Or
yeah, they get into a little bit that when they later on in the episode when they find a particular portion of the plane.
But otherwise, honestly, I think the most important pieces are the whole outer shell of the plane, because that's what people see. And then if you want to have the hood open, show what the motor looks like.
Yeah. And so once he gets the specifics, he's on his way to St. Andrews, Scotland. Not to golf.
That's what I would be doing.
Although that is the home of golf. Little links golf there, too. A little bit different than what we get here in the States. But he's going to Danino Airfield to meet with Archie Liggett, former Royal Air Force F-4 Phantom pilot, an old plane enthusiast. And as soon as I saw him, I'm like, this dude is like the Tom Cruise of Scotland.
As soon as they said Archie, I'm like, this guy's going to be cool.
And he was cool. And I feel like I was a little intimidated through the screen by him. I thought this dude probably could beat me to a pulp.
Is his real name Archibald? That's my question.
That's a solid question. If we ever meet Archie, that will be, can I call you Archibald?
Yes.
So they're meeting at the remains of a World War II airfield, air base there. Basically, Archie has this story about a maintenance worker that he met back in the day, a guy who was a maintenance worker, older gentleman than Archie, for the military base when it was still a military base. And he witnessed the powers that be burying these old planes, including Barracudas. So it was this story that kind of survived because he told it to Archie. And the guy was actually arrested for it because they told him, and then they told him, hey, you can't, this has to be, I don't know if they had NDAs back then.
They didn't. They had a wink and a nudge.
I assumed the getting arrested and being told in stern words was their version of the NDA. Like, you can't tell anyone about this.
There were times during the episode where I was like, are you all really from Scotland?
I heard it was about freedom.
There's not enough yelling.
I found myself a little upset at this part, though, because like I said earlier, this isn't a tragic war story. It's a tale of bureaucratic weirdness.
Or is it a tale of they had advanced technology and they just had to get rid of it and hide it before other people stole it?
Oh.
And was that advanced technology extraterrestrial?
Oh, here we go. Here we go. It's aliens because
Why
conspiracy
not?
Cody is in the house. Yeah, but at least that would make some sense. Like, dude, why are we burying this?
Especially after like all the wartime efforts of saving up metal and all that, like, why don't you just tear it apart and then recycle this stuff?
Yeah, they really don't address it at all in the episode. And I literally had to pause the show and let my brain go because that was the question. I'm like, wait, why? Why would you do that? Why couldn't it just sit in a warehouse somewhere? What are we hiding?
We don't have enough space.
They literally were parked in a field.
We don't have enough space for that.
So Archie and Josh take to the skies themselves. They go up in a helicopter to observe the topography of the area.
As one does.
And they find some odd topography, as they assumed they would. And Josh calls in geophysicist Dickie Bates.
Old Dickie.
Old Dickie Bates, who quickly says, yeah, I'm going to let you scan, Josh.
Well, he has been on a few episodes over the years. So he's a friend of the show.
Yeah. He's like, are you done having children? Because what this does is it scans the ground. It's an electromagnetic conductivity meter. It's just like a super powerful metal detector, right?
That's what I'm hearing.
And they're going to look at the wee burn. The wee burn, Cody.
And I'm like,
no, we don't like wee burn.
We don't.
I laughed a very immature amount of time about that one. Because the wee burn, according to Scotsmen, is a small river, not an affliction.
Out east of town, we have a wee burn.
Yeah, there's a lot of people here with wee burn. That was a cheap joke. And I'm better than that. No, I'm not. Okay, so yeah, they're gonna look around this odd topography where stuff's clearly been buried. And the meter says, yeah, there's definitely something metal buried there.
My guess is it's a tank.
Dude, it's naval.
I know. I'm just throwing out bad guesses since we supposedly have eyewitness testimony of, hey, there's planes here.
Did the British even have tanks?
Probably not. Now I'm thinking, since we buried it, maybe there's live ammunitions. And and that's why we buried it, because we didn't want people exploding these accidentally.
Well, that'd be a good reason, but now you got people like Josh digging it up.
Well, be careful.
And it's like, King Kong fixing a watch, because they bring in the heavy machinery, the digger, and he's just like peeling little layers off the top, and they find a brick, which they're a little more excited than I would have been.
I have found so many bricks in my life.
Right.
Guys.
That's stuff we can find here. Like, you guys are in Britain. There's actually old stuff there. But then they start finding some other things. They find a tool, then a battery, an aviation spark plug. So it's clear they're on the right track. And it kind of just ends there, this segment with, we're going to keep looking, as, it often does in Expedition Unknown. Meanwhile, Josh is going to go off to another setting.
As Josh is known to do.
And this setting is Alta, Norway, 500 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Population 15,000. It's like almost twice as big as our town. Which just goes to show you the Arctic Circle is a more habitable place than southeast Kansas.
It's like the Okefenokee swamp here sometimes.
It did look nice, though. I thought,
did.
Isn't that quaint? I'd like to live there.
And you can see the northern lights.
It's the Aurora Borealis capital of the world, Cody.
And when my wife heard that, she's like, can we go?
Do you think they're just like about whatever? Like we would be, and they'd be like, whatever.
Seen it 1,000 times.
We're going to go eat some fish. Or whatever you eat when you're in Norway. What's that fish that no one else eats?
Lutefisk?
Lutefisk. Do they eat lutefisk in Norway? I don't even know.
Yeah, it's a Scandinavian dish, so maybe.
Yeah. So,
or they eat reindeer. That's my go-to guess.
Do they really? Or are you just making that up? Are you just trying to be funny, or do people actually eat reindeer?
People eat a lot of different things, Dave.
Well, it's just,
I'm not ruling out reindeer.
I've never considered that before. I mean, Santa Claus runs deep here in America.
That he does.
So out in the reason this place is important, this Alta, Norway, is because the Nazis invaded Norway, and out in the fjord is where they parked the Nazi battleship, the Tirpitz. Which I was immediately struck because that sounds Jewish, which I found ironic. And Neil Tirpitz, he's a real mensch. Like what is that word? It must have been someone's name.
I don't know.
Who was clearly in the German military hiding his original faith background.
Potentially.
No, I don't know. I don't know where the name comes from. But that was it. It was parked out in the fjord. It was stationed there. And this is where the Barracudas went to basically have a glorious victory over the Nazi battleship Tirpitz, which we learn is the sister ship to the Bismarck. It's huge.
Gigantic.
It's a gigantic ship, and Josh meets his next friend, and his name is Frodo Linderfelt. I can't say their names.
He's from Norway.
His name's not Frodo, it's like Froda, but I'm just going to call him Frodo because it just rolls off the tongue better, and I really love Tolkien.
Sorry, person who's a real life person.
Frodo's a real life person. I just introduced him, Frodo Lingerjet, historian, the Norwegian Armed Forces Museum. By the way, when he meets him, did you catch this? So an ongoing discussion that Cody and I have a lot is like how much of this is set up, how much of this is just done for theatrics. And poor Frodo is not a good actor.
Shocking.
Because Josh goes, Frodo! And he's like, oh, hi. I was not totally standing here waiting for you to come in on this and start filming. It was the most blatant thing I think I've ever seen where I was like, oh, yeah, definitely staged meeting, which of course they are. It makes sense that they would be.
I like to think this was indeed their first encounter, and that's just how people from Norway are.
No. I'm attuned to it, Cody, because I work in radio. And the whole thing about radio is, even to this day where radio is just a different industry, you don't really want to bust up the fantasy in people's heads that when they hear you on the radio, it's live. They want to feel like they have a friend that's talking. So podcasting, even though we know people record podcasts, when we listen to them, our context is I'm with friends.
Well, in Norway, our friends act almost surprised to see us.
Actually, Norwegians have a fake surprise sound. Oh, hi. Churchill, they discuss, referred to the Tirpitz as the beast. We again referenced that this is a huge battleship. And though we're trying to have fun with this is actually a momentous thing. This is actually a big deal. It actually provides, I wondered why they didn't lead with this more, because it provides the basis of like why it might be important to try and find one or two of these planes and put them back together, because this is a big deal. And actually at the end of the episode, it becomes an even bigger thing, but we'll wait to get there. They 25 air raids on this ship is how much it took.
Doesn't sound like enough to me.
And the one that breaks through is Operation Tungsten. And basically, the destruction of this ship is what clears the way for the Normandy Beach invasion. D-Day takes place 2 months later. And they needed to clear these huge battleships off the map so that they could get the troops close enough to invade the mainland.
Wow.
And I mean, think about all the people that died on D-Day in that invasion of the beach. And that's just the invasion of the mainland. How many more would have died and they wouldn't even have made it if we didn't clear the way? So all of a sudden we're getting this influx of information in this part of the episode, like, oh, okay, this is the heaviness. This is the reason these planes were important.
And I would then again venture to say, is this plane important for this museum, or should it be at a different location, maybe of historical relevance, such as maybe around this area that was crucial for D-Day?
Well, I'm sure that these dudes who are putting these things together, probably that's their dream. Hey, let's put together enough that we can ship these off to places like, Normandy Beach, that we can ship these off to, one to Norway, like where they found this wreckage. And, I think, listen, guys are built a bit different. This is where I feel like I have trouble identifying with a lot of men. In the real world, we refer to guys, car guys. You know any car guys?
I am related to a car guy.
Yeah, my dad's a car guy. Your dad's a car guy. And they like nothing more than to just taking them apart and putting them back together, I guess. Is that a thing?
Well, fixing them up.
Yeah, well, but you can see that in these dudes with the planes.
Yes.
And I have found that as a guy who's not a car guy, you either are or aren't. This is something that you get fascinated with as a dude. And I'm sure there's women out there that like it too, just probably not as many. But there are car people and they're not. Well, this is the same thing. It's like there are people who are probably fascinated with aircraft. And they're fascinated with putting them together and all that. And I assume seeing this old aircraft would be a special thing for them. And Josh is going to make that happen for them. He's going to go out with Frodo, and they're going to go on a hike.
Where there's only like 5 hours of sunlight.
They had to make it quickly because they're hiking up a mountain. Apparently, this wreckage was found by some hikers. They reported it. And so they're going to go out and find this. I found it interesting that one of the shots of Josh as they're walking up the mountain, you can see the drone in the background. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
The drone providing the overhead shots behind Josh, which, again, shout out to this show for the cinematography. Man, they get some amazing shots.
Josh fell.
He did fall.
They caught that.
Yeah, he slipped on some ice, which it was weird because At first, there's water moving, and you're like, well, it must not be that cold. The water's not even frozen.
And you're wrong.
But then, after what seems like a lot of walking, they find a plane. The cold seems to have preserved it pretty well. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
I mean, here in the United States of humid, that thing would have rusted quickly.
Rusted and then just been little flakes.
Yeah. But not in Norway. In fact, it's pristine is what it kind of looks like, how well it's preserved. So long story short, they start brushing parts off, finding stuff, and they seem to, by the end of this episode, find the necessary parts to say that this is in fact a Barracuda wreck.
Yep.
The serial numbers confirm it. And this is the special part. I saved this for last because it was my favorite part. They find the names of the airmen because of the serial numbers that were stationed that flew that aircraft, and they're able to bring honor to these families, which is really cool. One of them managed to live through the wreck, was a POW, so they knew about him, but they didn't know, there was never really any definitive ending for the other two guys, I think, and now they know, which I think is a great way to end the episode. But again, I mean, make that a part of the mission. Make it carry that gravitas all the way through. That, like, hey, some of these people who were flying in these things, we don't know what happened to them. So finding a wreck would be a big deal. That's the episode. Somewhat intriguing at the end. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad they found it. That's cool. So do you have any quotes? I have a few quotes listed here. The best Josh quotes of the episode.
For the love of Churchill, trim back those shrubs or bushes. I don't remember what.
Probably going to be using that one quite a bit. For the love of Churchill, kids.
Yes.
Can you pick up your rooms? The most challenging Lego set ever, which carried both, a realistic view of it and was kind of funny. When he goes to St. Andrews, for the sake of our ratings, I will not be golfing. Maybe that would help.
Bazang.
When he's got the geomagnetic metal detector thing and he's walking with it, it's a long bar. He says, I feel like I work at the circus, which is a trapeze joke. The Rimbolts, my family, long line of trapeze artists. I'm just kidding. We're big gorillas. Our bodies weren't made for that.
I was going to say, this is not sounding accurate.
And then I think my favorite quote of the episode for Josh it was a quote that had a pop culture reference to it. And he said, the last time a Norwegian American were walking through the Arctic, there was an alien. And he asked, are you an alien? He's like, no, I'm not an alien. And he said, that's exactly what an alien would say. I laughed at that part. Referencing, of course, The Thing. Overall, how'd you like the episode?
If I rewatch it, it's going to be during nap time.
Was it? Yeah.
It's a one-off.
Yeah.
Like, I'm better for having watched it. I've learned something, but I also am like, it wasn't super exciting. So nap time material.
It was, yeah, exactly. So I wasn't bored watching it. It was interesting. There were real things being found and discovered. But Josh doesn't nearly drown. But he is funny, as usual, is charismatic, and it carries the parts of the episode maybe I don't find so interesting. But wasn't my favorite episode, but I wasn't not entertained. It's just I wouldn't probably, like you, go back and watch it.
Unless I was taking a nap.
All right. What did you guys think? Episode 4, Expedition Unknown, the search for the Barracudas, the planes, not the sea life or the cars.
Or the song.
Let us know how you liked the episode on the social media posts for this podcast. And of course, make sure and subscribe. Make sure and rate the podcast when you can. It helps us out a lot. And if you like it, share the podcast. All these episodes come with little share buttons. Share. We would really appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.